Are you stuck in your drawing journey, dealing with the frustrations of proportions, values, and finding your own style? If you've ever felt overwhelmed or confused by the intricate balance within these elements and uncertain how to move forwards, then this video is for you. By the way, I'm Adam. I've been drawing for over 25 years, and now I help aspiring charcoal artists come off the grid method so they feel connected to their work, master proportions so they have the confidence to take on those commissions, and develop their styles so they have their own artistic voice. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out any time I post a video about freehand drawing and expressive realism. Let's dive in. Now, first things first, I accidentally angled my camera a little bit too much when I filmed the drawing, and it's slightly out of focus as well. So I'm going to put up a photo of the finished drawing with the reference as well. So let's break the portrait down into its most four common struggles, relatively speaking: proportions, values, efficiency, and style. Now, within these struggles, they obviously umbrella into other factors as well, such as depth, which I would put within the value category, and likeness, I would put that in the combination of multiple elements. But let's just take the core factors just to make it easier. In terms of levels of your drawing journey, I would say that proportions and values are like the first level. Then it becomes efficiency, which would be the second level, and then style I would put as the third level. What I've learned is once you properly know how to put a portrait together, you also know how to take it apart. You understand how to imply certain areas within the drawing and also how to simplify it in terms of the overall look. Your focus isn't almost being suffocated by just trying to make sure the drawing looks like your subject, but rather your focus is how you want the actual piece to look in terms of composition and style. Now, the reason why portraits can be so difficult is because all of these factors intertwine with each other. They aren't so much separate categories, but at the same time, they also kind of are. An example to demonstrate my point is if I were to throw you 4 pencils all at the same time and you try to catch them, likelihood is you won't catch all of them, and maybe even some of you wouldn't even catch any of them. But if I were to throw 1 pencil to you, the chances are you're much more likely to catch it. And that's because you're only focusing on one thing. Now, this is why there's such slow progress when it comes to drawing, because there's many factors involved that work together that creates a portrait. So you kind of have to focus on all of them at once. If your goal is to be able to draw freely and eventually create a style that reflects your voice, or you want to take influence from some of your favorite artists, then you need to be able to draw by freehand. With a lot of artists, proportions are the most difficult and common struggle. It's the first mountain that you have to ascend, and it's usually the most difficult one as well. And it's something that you're always going to be climbing, even 20 years later. But the climb itself becomes more like you're driving up that mountain rather than climbing it without any ropes. Because you've done the journey before, you've conditioned yourself, you know the process, and you're more just going through the motions of it. But if you're still trying to understand the mechanics of proportions and the relationship it has with the other factors of the drawing, I wouldn't really recommend moving over to the grid method. You might think by moving to the grid that it will actually help with your drawings, and in certain aspects it will, because it's really good if you want to be able to learn how to render really well. But if your idea is to get comfortable with drawing first using the grid, so then you can move on to freehand drawing, I wouldn't really recommend that, because you're just deviating from the journey that you're going to need to take anyway. Ultimately, you need to ask yourself, what is your goal? If you want to focus on making something look as realistic as possible, and you don't mind using the grid method, then that will probably be a good direction for you to go down. But if you want to draw by freehand, you want to have that freedom, and you want to develop your own style, then you need to learn the fundamentals. A helpful exercise you can do, instead of just doing a drawing every single time to try and get better at that, which can be taxing and frustrating after a while, especially if it's not going how you want it to go, you can do some exercises instead. It makes the process a lot more digestible, and it means there's less at stake as well, because the goal isn't to draw a portfolio piece. What you can do is you can pick a section of the portrait. It could be half of it, it could be a quarter of it. You could even draw a circle around a particular area of the portrait if you want to. Whatever section you choose, break that section down into its most simple form. Draw out those big basic shapes that you can see. Break it down into really digestible bits of information rather than trying to copy everything that you see. Reduce those big shapes into 4 values, ranging from black, dark, mid, and light values. Keep it simple. Mark your connection points and build a very basic structure. Now, there's no right or wrong way in doing this. There's just more of a complicated way and more of a simple way. Now, depending on the actual reference that you're working from will depend on how easy it is to make that structure. Sometimes, depending on the portrait, it helps adding a little bit of value just because it makes it a little bit easier to gauge your measurements and your structure. So if that is the case, then add some value, but I would suggest just keeping most of it to the actual big shapes of the structure itself. Remember, this isn't about likeness. This isn't about making the drawing look perfect or even making it look good. This is just about proportions and placement. If you go back in this video and you have a look at my beginning stages of this drawing, you'll see that I'm not aiming for likeness right at the beginning. I'm only aiming to build a foundation that I can build on to then create that likeness. By doing this exercise, you're not actually going to have a nice looking drawing because it's just going to be these large, loose, basic shapes that link together. Remember, it's not a showcase piece. It's just an exercise. It's only meant to help you start training your brain into start simplifying those beginning stages and then see how it lines up with the reference afterwards. Now, some artists' work, they have really good placement and proportions for the level that they're at, but they lack values and depth. And then you have other artists' work where their values are amazing and they have really good readability, but their proportions and their placement are off. Now, I would actually say the person who has better values but worse proportions are in a better position because they only have to tweak certain aspects within the structure and their work will immediately transform. However, the person with the better proportions but lack values and depth, with my experience, they tend to progress slower because it's more intimidating putting in better values because they're scared to go darker. Now, just to be clear, better values doesn't always mean darker. It could also mean more saturated. It could be rendered a bit more, tightened a bit more, the balance and contrast with the surrounding areas. There's more to it than just darker, which is why I feel there's a slower progression. But when it comes to proportions, it's very much just lining up your connection points with your anchor point, using your landmarks as stepping stones, and just being a little bit more technical with the approach, which, to be fair, you could argue is more difficult, but there's less to focus on in comparison to improving values, in my opinion anyway. Now, when I was going through these exact stages, I would get my drawing to a stage where everything was secure. In terms of placement and proportions, I have my base value down and I'm ready to enter that next stage of the drawing process. To make sure that I wasn't being hesitant in putting more true values into my drawing, giving it that depth that I would need, I would add my black value down where it showed me on the reference. I now have no choice but to bring the rest of the portrait up in value to then match it with that black value that I put down. If I didn't match the values in comparison with that black value, the rest of the drawing, it would just look weird. So I would purposely put that black value in, so I had no choice but to match it with the rest of the values. Now, because I've built that muscle of that drawing process, to be honest with you, I usually just leave those black values to the very end. And this is just so I have a bit more freedom and leeway with the actual style and the process of the drawing. By leaving the black values at the very end, I get to dictate more on what I want you to focus on within the drawing, and then also get to suggest and imply areas to give the drawing more of a dynamic look. And that's because my focus is now on practicing style rather than the fundamentals. Now, when it comes to efficiency, this kind of just piggybacks off of how you approach your proportions and values. A lot of artists struggle with how long it takes them to complete a portrait, which if your work still hits the mark and it looks like your subject, and that is your biggest struggle right now, to be honest with you, you're in a very good position to be in. It's a champagne problem. It's still a struggle, and it's still something that you want to improve on, but it means you already have that tool set that you need. You just need to sharpen and file down those tools. The focus becomes on how to streamline and simplify that process and make better progress with less input. Now, I'm very guilty of this myself. If a piece has taken me longer than I expect it to, or that I wanted it to, there is an element of feeling like the drawing wasn't successful, even though I've created quite a nice looking portrait. And again, it's because now the goal isn't about capturing the likeness of my subject. The goal is efficiency. If it doesn't hit that mark, then it doesn't feel as successful as it should be. Now, something that you can do to help with efficiency and something that will really help with just the entire process is practicing blocking in. So this is where you separate your portrait to its core shadows and its core lights. Here's an example of a blocking practice that I did with my students about a week ago. So you want to reduce everything into a white value and a light or mid value. Even though technically your values won't be correct in comparison to the reference, you will still be building a correct base structure, which gives you the core shape of your subject's likeness. I would actually argue that this exercise is better rather than just practicing breaking everything down into very big basic shapes, but you still need to have that understanding of breaking everything down into shapes before you can really transition into having a successful block-in. So the better you get at breaking things down into very basic shapes, the better you will be within your blocking process. And then the better that you're at with your blocking process, the better that your showcase pieces will be as well. And then you have style. This is a very privileged position to be in, because now the goal isn't trying to capture a piece that looks like your subject. The focus is how you want the piece to look. Again, it's a struggle, and if you're in that position, it's a very big struggle, because that's where your artistic voice lies. This is where your identity is. This is where you get to work out how to make your portrait stand out from everyone else's. And it can be a minefield trying to work out how to develop your style. Now, in my experience, there's two types of approaches in navigating this. You have a natural style, and then you also have a practice style. When I finally had enough of working with the grid method, and I wanted to steer away from hyperrealism so I could draw completely by freehand and develop my own style, I tried drawing complete showcase pieces, trying to manipulate the values and forcing a style with no previous experience. I used to draw realistically what I thought texture would look like, because I didn't have a reference in terms of what a dynamic looking portrait looks like or how to do it. Kind of just threw crap at the wall and just waited to see if anything stuck, which again, it works, but it can also take a very long time. This is what I would call a natural style, weirdly enough. Something where you do enough reps based off of your past experience, and then something will naturally evolve over time. Then you have a practice style. This is where you get really specific with what you want to achieve by analyzing work that you like, doing studies and mock-ups of those specifics in preparation to a showcase piece with a clear vision. Now, this is what really accelerates your progression, but something that is only really optimal once you are confident with everything else that we've spoken about. With this drawing here, my focus was the background and the composition. How can I incorporate a dramatic, dynamic looking background into an already dramatic looking reference? This is from Mobland, by the way. It's a British drama. Highly recommend it. Now, when I put this piece together, this wasn't just by luck. I didn't just guess how to create this background or guess how to put the composition together. I planned this, and I did this by creating a vision board with all the pieces that I like that are still aligned with what kind of style of work that I want to create. I'm not just guessing and figuring it out as I'm drawing it, even though I also do like to do that as well because I get to feel the drawing out within the process. However, I made a mock-up of how I want the composition and background to look, so I have the best possible route in creating the piece that I want while developing my style. I can't really do any of this properly without actually being confident in putting a portrait together first. That is what will help you the most in terms of developing your style, because then all of your focus can just be on that. It will give you complete freedom. There's almost levels and stages to go through and experience that you need to get first in order to make each stage a little bit easier. Obviously, you can start focusing on style while still grasping the fundamentals, but it just means the whole process will just be a little bit more difficult, because instead of just focusing on one thing, you're now splitting your efforts with the experience that you already have. And if you want to just experiment with your work as well, you should 100% absolutely do that. You shouldn't just treat the process as step 1, step 2, step 3, and step 4, because yes, that will help, but it can be kind of boring sometimes as well. Drawing is also meant to be fun. So experiment with the drawing. Take time just to create something, just to see what happens, because you also gain very valuable experience doing it that way as well. But I think there should be a balance between a more structured approach in learning and then also just experimenting and seeing what happens. Combining the two is going to work so well in progressing in how you want to. If you found this video helpful and you want to know more about working with me and my mentorship program, I'll leave a link in the description so you can book a call. We'll talk about your struggles and then also build a specific roadmap for you so you know exactly how you can reach your goals as well. Link in the description to book a call. I appreciate it.